I had tested 23 women in 2 years. 23 dates where my card declined, where I wore thrift store clothes, where I drove a car held together by rust and prayers. After my ex-wife left me, the moment my money dipped, I made a vow. Never be loved for my wealth again. 23 women failed. Then I met Natalie, a waitress drowning in medical bills, working doubles just to keep her sick mother alive. When my card was rejected, Natalie didn't blink. She pulled out $47 in crumpled tips and paid without a word. 3 dates later, she passed every test. But watching her laugh, despite the exhaustion in her eyes, I realized something terrifying. What if she passed and then hated me forever, making her prove she was worthy? I had built an empire from nothing. At 38, I owned a chain of boutique hotels, stretching across 12 states, employed over 3,000 people, and had a net worth that most people couldn't comprehend. But none of that mattered when I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand, my 6-year-old daughter, Zoe, smiling with her 2 front teeth missing. She was the reason I did everything, and she was the reason I trusted no one. 3 years ago, I had been married to a woman named Vanessa, blonde, beautiful, born into old money. She had loved me fiercely when my business was thriving, but when a bad investment temporarily wiped out 30% of my portfolio, Vanessa filed for divorce within 6 weeks. She didn't just want out of the marriage, she wanted Zoe. "You can't provide her the lifestyle she deserves," Vanessa had said in court, her voice cold and rehearsed. "A child needs stability." I had fought back with everything I had. I won custody, but the victory left scars that money couldn't heal. My ex-wife hadn't loved me. She had loved what I represented: security, status, a certain kind of life. The moment that life seemed threatened, she was gone. After the divorce, I made a promise to myself. If I ever loved again, it would be real, not based on my bank account, not based on the penthouse or the private jet or the name recognition. I needed to know with absolute certainty that whoever I let into my life, into Zoe's life, would stay, even if everything disappeared. So I created the test. It was simple in design, but brutal in execution. I would show up to blind dates dressed in clothes from thrift stores. I would drive a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and torn seats. I would take women to modest restaurants, and when the bill came, my credit card would be declined. Not because I couldn't pay, but because I had programmed it that way. 23 women, 23 dates over nearly 2 years. Some laughed nervously and offered to split the bill before never returning my calls. Others looked at me with barely concealed disgust, making excuses to leave early. A few made it to the second date, where I would bring them to a small rented apartment instead of my mansion. They never made it to the third. Not one of them had ever met Zoe. That was the final test, the one no woman had earned the right to take. Then Natalie Brooks walked into my life. She wasn't supposed to be my date that night. I had been set up by a mutual friend with someone else entirely. But the original woman had canceled last minute. Natalie was the replacement, a friend of a friend, someone who had reluctantly agreed to fill in. When I arrived at the diner, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, still wearing her work uniform, a simple black polo, jeans, and a worn apron she hadn't had time to remove. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many hours and too little sleep. She looked exhausted, but when she saw me approach, she straightened up and offered a genuine smile. "You must be Darius," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Natalie. Sorry about the outfit. I came straight from my shift. No apology needed," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Long day," Natalie laughed softly. "Long week, long month, honestly. But I'm here now." We talked for 2 hours. Natalie worked as a waitress at a family restaurant across town, pulling double shifts 6 days a week. She didn't offer this information as a complaint, just a fact of her life, stated without self-pity. I found myself drawn to the way she spoke, direct and unguarded. She asked questions about me too, but they weren't the usual questions I received. She didn't ask what I did for a living or where I lived. She asked what I liked to read, whether I believed in second chances, what made me laugh. When the bill came, I reached for my wallet. The waiter ran my card and returned with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, sir." It was declined. This was the moment, the first test. I watched Natalie's face carefully, waiting for the familiar flicker of judgment, the subtle shift in body language that signaled retreat. It never came. Instead, Natalie reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small stack of bills, ones and fives, crumpled and worn. She counted them quickly and placed them on the table. $47, she said. That should cover it. I stared at the money. I knew what $47 meant to someone like her. That was groceries. That was gas. That was the difference between making rent and falling short. "Natalie, I can't let you. You can pay me back whenever," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Or never. I know what it feels like to be judged for being broke." Those words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't performing generosity for show. She meant it. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Shame. I drove her home that night in my beat-up Civic, and she didn't comment on the car. She didn't ask why a grown man was driving something that belonged in a junkyard. When I pulled up to her apartment building, a modest complex with peeling paint and a flickering entrance light, she turned to me with a tired smile. "I had a nice time," she said. "Really? Can I see you again?" The question came out before I could stop it. Natalie studied my face for a long moment. "Yeah, I'd like that." The second date took place a week later. I picked her up in the same car and brought her to my rented apartment, a one-bedroom unit in a working-class neighborhood, sparsely furnished and deliberately unremarkable. Natalie walked in and looked around. Her eyes landed on the wall above the couch, where I had hung 3 of Zoe's drawings, crayon sketches of stick figures and lopsided houses. "Your daughter made these?" she asked. I nodded. "She's 6, thinks she's going to be a famous artist someday." Natalie moved closer to examine the drawings. "She's got a good eye for color, this one here." She pointed to a drawing of a purple sky over an orange house. "Most kids would make the sky blue. She sees things differently." It was such a small observation, but it struck me deeply. 23 women, and not one of them had ever looked at Zoe's drawings. Not one had asked about my daughter beyond surface-level politeness. We spent the evening cooking dinner together in my tiny kitchen, pasta with jarred sauce. Nothing fancy. Natalie moved through the space comfortably, not seeming to notice or care about the cramped quarters. She told me about her mother, who was battling cancer and couldn't work anymore. She told me about the medical bills piling up, the debt that felt like a weight she could never lift. "I had a boyfriend once," Natalie said quietly, stirring the pasta. "When my mom got sick, he left. Said he didn't want his life dragged down by my baggage." She let out a small, bitter laugh. His exact words, baggage. I felt my chest tighten. He was an idiot, maybe. Or maybe he was just honest about what he could handle. Natalie shrugged, but I could see the old wound beneath her casual tone. Either way, I learned something. I don't need someone rich, I just need someone who won't run when things get hard. The third date was the test I had never administered before. I introduced Natalie to Zoe. I told myself it was necessary, that this was the final checkpoint, the ultimate verification of a woman's character. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted them to meet. I wanted to see Natalie in my real world, even if she didn't know it was real. We met at a park near my rented apartment. Zoe was shy at first, hiding behind my leg and peeking out at the stranger. Natalie didn't push. She didn't crouch down and force conversation or try too hard to win the child over. Instead, she simply sat on a bench, pulled out a small sketchbook she had brought, and began to draw. Zoe watched from a distance, curiosity gradually overcoming her shyness. After 10 minutes, she inched closer. After 20, she was sitting beside Natalie, watching her sketch. "What are you drawing?" Zoe asked. "A dragon," Natalie replied, "but I'm not very good at wings. Want to help me?" Zoe took the pencil Natalie offered and began adding her own details. Flowers around the dragon's feet, a tiny crown on its head. Natalie praised each addition with genuine enthusiasm. And soon, Zoe was chattering away, telling Natalie about her favorite colors and her teacher at school and the book she was reading about a princess who saved herself. When Natalie prepared to leave, Zoe tugged on her sleeve and handed her a piece of paper. She had torn a page from Natalie's sketchbook and drawn something while Natalie wasn't looking. 3 stick figures holding hands under a purple sky. At the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, Zoe had written Zoe's family. Natalie's breath caught. She looked at me, then back at the drawing, then at the little girl staring up at her with hopeful eyes. "Will you come back?" Zoe asked. Natalie knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Do you want me to come back?" Zoe nodded. "Then I will." As I drove Natalie home that evening, she was quiet, gazing out the window at the passing streetlights. Finally, she spoke. "She's wonderful, Darius. You've done an amazing job with her." "She likes you," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. "She doesn't warm up to people easily. Neither do I." Natalie smiled faintly. "I guess we understand each other." That night, after dropping Natalie off, I sat alone in my car outside her apartment building for a long time. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. She had passed every test, the declined card, the shabby apartment, the meeting with my daughter. Natalie hadn't flinched at any of it. She had been kind, genuine, and real in a way that I had stopped believing existed. But that was the problem, because now I faced a choice I hadn't anticipated. I could continue the charade, keep playing the role of a struggling single father, keep hiding behind my manufactured poverty, or I could tell her the truth and risk losing everything. If I told her, she might leave, not because of the money, but because of the deception. She might feel used, manipulated, reduced to a test subject in my experiment against heartbreak. And if she left, she would take something with her that I couldn't afford to lose. Not just my chance at love, but Zoe's fragile hope for a family. I thought about the drawing my daughter had given Natalie. 3 stick figures under a purple sky labeled Zoe's family. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't know what to do. The weeks that followed were the happiest I had known since before my divorce. Natalie came over nearly every evening after her shifts, bringing leftovers from the restaurant or picking up groceries to cook dinner together in my cramped kitchen. Zoe began waiting by the window each night, watching for Natalie's car. And the moment she arrived, the little girl would run to the door with arms outstretched. But with every passing day, the lies grew heavier. Natalie asked once what I did for work. I told her I was a manager at a small hotel downtown. Technically true if you ignored the fact that I owned the entire chain. She asked about my family, and I mentioned my mother lived nearby, but kept the details vague. When she wondered aloud about my future plans, whether I wanted to grow in my career or try something new, I deflected with half answers and changed the subject. Each lie was small on its own, but together they formed a wall between us, a wall Natalie couldn't see, but I felt every time she looked at me with trust in her eyes. One evening, my mother called. Gloria Mitchell was a woman who had raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment in the toughest part of Chicago. She had worked 2 jobs for most of her life, scrimped and saved to send me to college, and watched with fierce pride as I built my empire from nothing. But Gloria was also practical to a fault. and she had opinions about everything, especially my love life. I heard you've been seeing someone, Gloria said without preamble. A waitress, I sighed. How did you hear about that? I have my sources. Darius, honey, I'm not trying to interfere. Then don't. Gloria ignored me. I just think you should keep your options open. The Hendersons' daughter, Camille, you remember her? She graduated from Yale Law, works at a firm in Manhattan now. Beautiful girl, smart, from a good family. Mom, I'm not interested in being set up. It's just a dinner 3 weeks from Saturday. The Hendersons are coming to town for a charity gala, and I already told them you'd join us. Gloria's voice softened slightly. I know Vanessa hurt you, but not every woman is like her, and Zoe deserves a mother who can. Zoe has me. I cut in. That's enough. Is it? Gloria asked quietly. Or is that just what you tell yourself? After the call ended, I sat alone in my rented apartment, staring at the wall where Zoe's drawings hung. My mother wasn't wrong. Zoe did deserve more than a father who worked too much and trusted too little. But Gloria's solution, marrying someone from the right background, someone vetted and approved, felt like trading one kind of cage for another. Natalie wasn't from the right background. She didn't have a Yale degree or family connections or a trust fund. But when she walked through the door, Zoe lit up in a way I had never seen before. That had to mean something. 2 weeks later, Natalie was at the apartment for a movie night. Zoe had picked the film, an animated story about a princess who saved her kingdom without a prince, and the three of us sat together on the worn couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn. Zoe had positioned herself between the two adults, her small body leaning against Natalie's side as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Halfway through the movie, Zoe fell asleep. I moved to carry her to bed, but Natalie shook her head. Let me, she whispered. I watched as Natalie lifted my daughter gently, cradling her against her chest. Zoe stirred but didn't wake, her arms instinctively wrapping around Natalie's neck. Something in my chest cracked open at the sight. I followed them to Zoe's small bedroom and stood in the doorway as Natalie tucked the blanket around the sleeping child. For a moment, everything was still. Then Zoe whimpered, her face twisting in the grip of some dream. Mommy, she murmured. Mommy, don't go. Natalie froze. She looked at me, uncertainty flickering across her face. I nodded once, giving her permission I wasn't sure I had the right to give. Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and began to stroke Zoe's hair. She started humming softly, a lullaby I didn't recognize, something slow and tender. Zoe's whimpering subsided, her breathing evened out, and then Natalie leaned down and whispered something so quietly that I almost didn't hear it. I'm not your mommy, sweetheart, but I'm here. I promise I'm here. I stepped back from the doorway, my throat tight. I walked to the kitchen and gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. Natalie wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress me or pass some test. She was simply loving my daughter, openly, honestly, without expectation of reward, and I was lying to her every single day. When Natalie emerged from Zoe's room a few minutes later, she found me standing by the window, staring out at the parking lot below. She's asleep, Natalie said softly. I think she was dreaming about her mom. I nodded but didn't turn around. Natalie moved closer, standing beside me. You never talk about her. Vanessa, I mean. What happened between you two? It was a fair question. Natalie had shared her own pain, and I had given her almost nothing in return. She left when things got hard, I said finally. I made a bad investment. Lost a lot of money temporarily, but she didn't wait to find out. Filed for divorce and tried to take Zoe with her. I let out a bitter laugh. She said I couldn't provide the lifestyle our daughter deserved, as if love could be measured in square footage. Natalie was quiet for a moment. That must have been awful. It was. But the worst part wasn't losing the money or even the marriage. It was realizing that she never saw me. She saw what I could give her. The moment that changed, I became worthless. Natalie reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, slightly rough from years of work. You're not worthless, Darius. And for what it's worth, I don't care about any of that. I know you don't. The words came out before I could stop them, heavy with meaning I couldn't explain. Natalie tilted her head, studying my face. Then why do you look so sad? Because I'm doing the same thing to you, I thought. I'm measuring your worth. I'm testing you, and you have no idea. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I squeezed her hand and forced a smile. Just tired. It's been a long week. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. The following Sunday, I took Zoe to visit my mother. Gloria lived in a spacious house in the suburbs, now a gift from me after my first major success. She had resisted at first, claiming she didn't need charity, but eventually relented when I pointed out that the house had a big backyard where Zoe could play. While Zoe ran outside to chase butterflies, I sat with my mother in the living room. Gloria was flipping through a stack of magazines, making small talk about the neighborhood and her book club. Then she stopped on a page and smiled. Look at this. They did a feature on the new hotel in Austin. You look so handsome in this photo. She held up the magazine, a business publication with me on the cover, wearing a tailored suit and standing in front of one of my properties. The headline read, Darius Mitchell, the self-made billionaire redefining luxury hospitality. I barely glanced at it. Mom, can you put that away? I don't want... But I was too late. Zoe had wandered back inside, a butterfly temporarily forgotten. She stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the magazine in her grandmother's hands. Daddy, she said, her voice small and confused. Why are you wearing fancy clothes, and why is our house so big in the picture? My heart stopped. Gloria looked between me and my granddaughter, realization dawning on her face. Darius, what is going on? Why doesn't Zoe know about... Not now, Mom. I crossed the room quickly, kneeling in front of my daughter. Zoe, sweetheart, that's just a picture. It's for work. It doesn't mean anything. But Zoe's brow furrowed, the way it always got when she was working through a problem. But Grandma's house is big, and you said we live in a small apartment because we don't have a lot of money. She looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. Did you lie to me, Daddy? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had told myself the deception was necessary. I had convinced myself that keeping Zoe in the dark was protecting her, maintaining the illusion until I found someone worthy of knowing the truth. But standing here now, watching my 6-year-old daughter grapple with the realization that her father had lied, I understood something I had been avoiding for months. I wasn't just deceiving Natalie. I was teaching my daughter that dishonesty was acceptable when it served your purposes. I was modeling the very behavior I claimed to despise. Zoe, I said carefully, Daddy made a mistake. I was trying to protect us, but I did it the wrong way. I'm sorry. Zoe considered this for a long moment. Are you going to tell Natalie the truth? I stared at my daughter. Sometimes I forgot how perceptive she was, how much she absorbed even when I thought she wasn't paying attention. Yes, I said. I'm going to tell her. Good. Zoe nodded solemnly. Because lying is bad. You told me that. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living this double life. The weight of the deception was crushing me. And worse, it was seeping into every part of my existence, my relationship with Natalie, my role as a father, my own sense of who I was. I called Natalie and asked her to come over the next evening, but not to the apartment. I gave her a different address, the address of my real home. Natalie arrived at 7. I watched through the window as her car pulled up to the gate, hesitating before the massive iron entrance. She called me, confusion evident in her voice. Darius, I think I have the wrong address. This can't be right. It's right, I said. I'll buzz you in. The driveway was long, winding through manicured gardens and past a fountain before reaching the main house, a sprawling estate with floor-to-ceiling windows and architecture that had been featured in design magazines. Natalie parked her old sedan and stepped out, staring up at the building with an expression I couldn't read. I met her at the front door. What is this? Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Darius, whose house is this? Mine. She looked at me, then back at the house, then at me again. I don't understand. I know. Come inside, please. I need to explain. I led her through the foyer, past the grand staircase, and the artwork on the walls into a sitting room that was larger than her entire apartment. Natalie stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the chandelier and the view of the swimming pool through the French doors. "You're rich," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How rich?" I took a breath. "I own a chain of boutique hotels, 37 properties across 12 states. My net worth is somewhere around 1.2 billion. Natalie said nothing. Her face had gone very still, the way it did when she was processing something difficult. "The apartment," she said slowly. "The car, the credit card that got declined." She looked at me and I saw the moment understanding clicked into place. It was all fake. "You were testing me?" "Yes." "How many women?" Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. "How many women did you do this to before me?" 23. Natalie let out a short, sharp laugh, not amused, just hollow. 23. And I'm number 24. The experiment that finally worked. "Natalie, please let me explain." "Explain what?" She turned to face me fully, and now I could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "That you've been lying to me for months. That every moment I thought was real, every dinner in that tiny kitchen, every night on that awful couch, every time I looked at you and thought maybe I'd finally found someone who saw me, it was all just a test." "The feelings were real," I said desperately. "Everything I felt for you, everything between us, that was never fake, but the foundation was." Natalie's voice cracked. "You built this relationship on a lie, Darius. You watched me count out my tip money to pay for a dinner you could have bought 100 times over. You let me believe we were equals, two people struggling through life together. And the whole time you were judging me, evaluating whether I was good enough to pass your little test. I was trying to protect myself and Zoe after what happened with Vanessa. I'm not Vanessa." Natalie's shout echoed through the cavernous room. "I never asked you for anything. I never cared about your money because I didn't know you had any. And you know what the worst part is? I would have loved you anyway. Rich or poor, it wouldn't have mattered. But you never gave me the chance to prove that. Instead, you had to turn it into a game." I reached for her, but she stepped back. "I grew up poor," Natalie said, her voice dropping to something raw and wounded. "My whole life people looked at me and saw what I didn't have. And now you made me prove I wasn't a gold digger. You put me through test after test, watching to see if I'd fail. How is that any different from what my ex did? You both looked at me and saw someone who needed to be evaluated before she could be trusted. Natalie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. You were?" She nodded, her jaw tight. "And I need to leave now. Please don't go. Please just let me what? Explain more. Apologize more." Natalie shook her head. "I need time, Darius. I need to figure out if there's anything left to salvage here or if the whole thing was just a beautiful lie." She walked toward the door, then stopped. When she turned back, her expression was the saddest thing I had ever seen. "I promised Zoe I'd be there for her. That wasn't a test and it wasn't a lie, it was real. So whatever happens between us, I need you to tell her that I didn't abandon her. I need her to know that." Then she was gone. I stood alone in my enormous house, surrounded by everything money could buy and feeling emptier than I ever had in my life. After a while, I walked upstairs to Zoe's room. She was staying at Gloria's for the night, but her drawings were still pinned to the wall. Dragons with crooked wings, houses under purple skies, and there in the corner, the picture she had drawn at the park. 3 stick figures holding hands labeled Zoe's family. I had ruined everything. Not because I was poor and not because I was rich, but because I had been so afraid of being hurt, that I had hurt someone else instead, someone innocent, someone kind, someone who had never asked for anything except honesty. I sank onto my daughter's small bed and buried my face in my hands. Tomorrow, Zoe would come home. She would ask where Natalie was, and I would have to find the words to explain that sometimes when you spend your whole life building walls to protect yourself, you end up locking out the very people you were trying to keep close. The days after Natalie left were the longest of my life. Zoe came home from Gloria's the next morning, and the first thing she asked was where Natalie was. I knelt down and told her the truth, or as much of it as a 6-year-old could understand. I explained that I had made a mistake, that I had kept secrets from Natalie, and that she needed some time alone to think. Zoe listened quietly, her small face serious. When I finished, she asked only one question: Is she coming back? I couldn't answer. Over the following week, Zoe grew quieter than I had ever seen her. She stopped waiting by the window in the evenings. She stopped asking to watch movies or go to the park. Most troubling of all, she stopped drawing. The crayons sat untouched in their box, and the sketchbook Natalie had given her remained closed on her desk. I tried everything. I suggested we bake cookies together, or visit the zoo, or drive to the beach. Zoe agreed to each activity without enthusiasm, going through the motions but never truly present. At night, I could hear her talking softly to herself in bed, and once I caught the words that broke my heart. I miss you, Natalie. Please come back. My mother called multiple times, reminding me about the charity gala and the Henderson's daughter. I finally snapped during the fourth call. I'm not going, Mom. I'm not interested in Camille Henderson or anyone else you want to set me up with. Gloria was silent for a moment. This is about the waitress, isn't it? Her name is Natalie. And yes, it was real. The realest thing I've had since Zoe was born. I ran a hand over my face. I destroyed it. I lied to her for months. Tested her like she was applying for a job instead of falling in love. And now she's gone. And Zoe won't draw anymore. And I don't know how to fix any of it. The line was quiet. When Gloria spoke again, her voice had softened. Then maybe you should stop trying to fix it and just be honest. Write to her. Tell her everything you just told me. If she's the woman you think she is, she'll at least hear you out. After hanging up, I sat at my desk for a long time. My mother was right. I had spent so long constructing tests and walls and defenses that I had forgotten how to simply be vulnerable. Natalie had given me her whole self, her struggles, her fears, her wounded heart, and I had given her calculations in return. I couldn't undo what I had done, but maybe I could offer her something I had never given anyone else: complete, unguarded honesty. I began to write. The letter wasn't long. I didn't try to justify my actions or explain away my mistakes. I simply told her the truth, that I had been afraid, that my fear had made me cruel, and that I understood now what I had taken from her. I told her about Zoe's silence, not to guilt her into returning, but because Natalie had asked me to let Zoe know she hadn't been abandoned. It seemed only fair that Natalie should know the impact she had left behind. I ended the letter with words I had never spoken to anyone. You told me once that you just needed someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. I want to be that person. Not because you passed my tests, but because you showed me what real love looks like. Patient, honest, unconditional. I don't deserve another chance. But if you ever decide to give me one, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. And Natalie, you were never a burden. You were never someone who needed to prove your worth. You were a gift. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to see that. Before sealing the envelope, I went to Zoe's room. My daughter was sitting on her bed, staring out the window at nothing. Zoe, I'm going to send a letter to Natalie. Would you like to send her something too? For the first time in days, a spark of life flickered in Zoe's eyes. She climbed off the bed, walked to her desk, and opened her sketchbook. I watched as she selected her crayons carefully. Purple for the sky, green for the grass, brown and black for the figures. She worked in silence for nearly 20 minutes, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. When she finished, she held up the drawing. 3 figures stood under a purple sky holding hands, but this time, the words at the bottom were different. Miss Natalie, I miss you. Our family is missing you. I felt my throat tighten. I took the drawing, gently, placed it in the envelope with my letter, and mailed it that afternoon. Then I waited. Across town, Natalie was living in a fog. She went to work, took orders, smiled at customers, collected her tips. She went home, checked on her mother, made sure she took her medication. She lay in bed at night and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment with me and Zoe, trying to separate what had been real from what had been performance. The worst part was that she still loved me. Despite everything, the lies, the manipulation, the months of calculated deception, she couldn't stop thinking about the way I looked at her when she sang Zoe to sleep. She couldn't forget the sound of my voice when I told her about Vanessa, the raw pain that no amount of money could mask. She couldn't erase the feeling of Zoe's small arms around her neck or the weight of the child's trust as she drifted off to sleep. But trust was exactly what I had stolen from her. I had taken her most vulnerable moments and turned them into data points in my experiment. How could she ever believe anything I said again? The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Natalie had walked out of my mansion. She almost threw it away unopened, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps the sight of her name written in my handwriting, or the slight bulge in the envelope that suggested it contained more than just paper. She sat down at her kitchen table and carefully tore it open. Zoe's drawing fell out first. Natalie stared at the 3 figures under the purple sky, at the wobbly handwriting that spelled out, "Our family is missing you." Something cracked open inside her chest, and before she knew it, she was crying, deep, racking sobs that she couldn't control. She read my letter through blurred vision. I wasn't asking her to come back. I wasn't making promises or offering explanations. I was simply telling her the truth. Finally, with nothing held back, and at the end those words that seemed to reach through the page and wrap around her heart. You were never a burden. You were a gift. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not her ex-boyfriend, who had seen her struggles as obstacles, not the parade of people who had looked at her circumstances and decided she wasn't worth the trouble. I had lied to her for months. Yes, but in this letter, in this moment, I was offering her something my deception had made impossible before, the chance to see who I really was. And who I really was, she realized, was a man who had been just as wounded as her. A man who had built walls because he didn't know any other way to survive. A man who had been wrong, deeply wrong, but who was finally brave enough to admit it. Natalie looked at Zoe's drawing again. Then she made a decision. She drove to my estate the next evening. I answered the door myself, and the hope in my eyes was so raw that Natalie almost lost her nerve. But she had come to say something, and she was going to say it. "I didn't come back because of the letter," she began. "And I didn't come back because you're rich. I came back because Zoe deserves to have someone who keeps their promises, and because you finally told me the truth, even though you knew it might not change anything." I nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm not sure you do." Natalie took a breath. "I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. You took something from me that I can't get back. The innocence of those early months, the belief that what we had was built on honesty. But I've been thinking about what you wrote, about being afraid, and I realized something." She met my eyes. "I've been afraid too. Afraid to trust anyone. Afraid to believe I could be loved without conditions. The difference is, I never turned my fear into a weapon against someone else." "You're right," I said quietly, "and I can't undo what I did. I can only promise to be different going forward. That's not enough." Natalie's voice was firm. "I need more than promises. I need honesty every single day, even when it's hard. I need you to treat me like a partner, not a test subject. And I need you to understand that if you ever deceive me again about anything, I'm gone for good." "I understand." "There's one more thing." Natalie's expression softened slightly. "I don't want to be the poor girl who got saved by the billionaire. And I don't want you to be the wounded man who needed me to heal him. We start over as equals, or we don't start over at all." I extended my hand. "Equals." Natalie looked at my hand for a long moment. Then she took it. "Equals." 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Natalie and I sat at the kitchen table in my estate while Zoe worked on a new drawing beside us. The house was different now, warmer somehow, filled with Natalie's touches. Her mother had moved into the guest house after her treatment improved, and the sound of her laughter could sometimes be heard drifting across the garden. Zoe finished her drawing and held it up proudly. It showed three figures under a purple sky, just like before. But the words at the bottom had changed. My family. Natalie's eyes glistened as she looked at the picture. I reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you, I said softly, for giving me a chance to be real. Natalie squeezed my hand back. Thank you for finally letting me see you. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, casting golden light through the windows. And in the kitchen of the big house that had once felt so empty, a family sat together, imperfect, healing, but finally built on something true. Looking back on everything that happened with Natalie and my little girl Zoe, the hardest truth I ever had to face was that my fear of being hurt again almost cost me the one real love I'd been searching for my whole life. I spent years building walls, testing women with fake poverty and stage struggles because my ex had walked out the second the money dipped, leaving me terrified that anyone who came close would only want the billionaire, not the broken single dad underneath. But when Natalie paid for our first dinner with crumpled tips she could barely afford, when she sat on the floor drawing dragons with Zoe and whispered promises to a scared little girl who'd already lost too much, I realized I'd been the one doing the hurting. I'd turned love into a game, measuring her worth instead of opening my heart and trusting that real connection doesn't need tests. It needs honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to let someone see the real you, scars and all. That lesson still hits me deep. Every time we hide behind lies or walls because we're afraid of getting abandoned, we push away the very people who would stay through the hard parts. We teach our kids that fear is smarter than love. If you've ever guarded your heart so tightly that you ended up lonely, or watched someone you care about slip away because you couldn't be real, you know how heavy that regret feels. So tonight, as I sit here with Natalie's hand in mine and Zoe's latest drawing taped to the fridge, I'm reminding myself, and you, that the bravest thing we can do is drop the tests and just show up as we are. Love that survives isn't perfect, it's honest. Before I finish, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, whether it's a rainy night in Chicago or somewhere halfway across the country, and share one lesson this story stirred in your own heart. If it moved you even a little, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep bringing these raw, real stories straight to you. Your support means more than you know.